Have you ever considered becoming a fugitive?
The American South has done it, and today we'll be talking about Edmund Wilson, one of the most significant writers in the 20th century America. Hi, my name is Nureen,
And my name is Demi.
and welcome to our channel. Today we'll be looking at Edmund Wilson, who is, like I mentioned before, is considered a very significant writer in the 20th century American. He is known as a critic, and people consider him as a powerhouse in the American literary world.
I mean, it wasn't just one thing that he did. He was a critic, an essayist, a novelist, an editor, a poet, a playwright. He's done it all, honestly.
Yeah, and we have a lot of things to cover today, especially regarding his works and legacy that he left behind. And the main question we wanted to ask is why Wilson still resonates today in this world, and why is he considered so important?
Yeah, right. I mean, we have a few sources lined up. The New York Times, for example, an article on the Poetry Foundation on his critical work, and stuff on the National Endowment for the Humanities, about the Library of America, and how Wilson practically inspired the creation of the Library of America.
Yeah, that was a fascinating one to read. And our audience who are watching, these resources will be linked in our description below if you would like to check them out.
Yeah.
Now let's look a bit into his background, shall we? So he was born in New Jersey, US, 1895, and he is considered an only child. His father was a lawyer and his mother was apparently deaf. And his mother actually nicknamed him Bunny, and it practically stuck with him his entire life.
Bunny?
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I mean, I read he received his education in Princeton, and I believe his education there really kickstarted his career. And he went to Princeton with F. Scott Fitzgerald, another really important fugitive, and Wilson later actually edited his unfinished work.
Oh wow, so with him being an editor and a critic and all, so how did that really shape him, him being a literary critic?
Okay, so when it came to his criticalness, I guess you could say he had this really big demand for intellectual depth, and that really ends up guiding his criticism later. I mean, he criticized things like imagination without intellectual control, a desire for beauty without an aesthetic ideal, and even a gift for expression without very many ideas.
Wow, he sounds very harsh. I read that one of his more prominent characteristics was that he wasn't afraid to be critical, even if it was considered controversial back then. He once criticized Robert Frost, calling him, and I quote, a dreadful old fraud and a relentless self-promoter.
Goodness, strong words. Really, it shows you how unpredictable his taste could be. And people call him some chameleon because he basically had a knack for adopting the writing style from writers that he admired, like Henry James, for example.
Oh wow, that's really interesting. And his legacy, was he planning for it?
I mean, a little bit, yeah. Quite deliberately, actually. From the mid-30s, he had this rule about not letting articles be reprinted unless he'd revised them for one of his books.
Oh, so he wanted the books to be a definitive version.
Yeah, he really was emphasizing on creating critical essays and then putting them in books and then publishing the books with the critical essays.
Oh, so now that's got me thinking how much of his life is actually true then, considering that he only released what he wanted the world to see. But then again, he wasn't really shy about controversy. As I mentioned earlier, he openly wrote about his affairs, didn't he? And with how explicitly he talks about his affairs.
I guess one could maybe argue that he wasn't afraid of being honest, even if it was messy. So maybe his editorial control wasn't about hiding things, but about accuracy, because it reflects in his work, making sure what was out there was true, uncensored, and on his terms. And isn't that just what being a fugitive was all about?
Yeah, speaking about censorship, this connects to the Library of America story, right? This was his big vision.
Very much so. He wanted a series of affordable, pocket-sized American classics, those French play editions, because he was really inspired by French literature. And he pitched the idea to Jason Epstein in the mid-1950s over drinks at the Princeton Club.
Oh yeah, I read about that. So he wasn't alone, right? He had John Thompson drafted this big proposal, and he also had literary figures Leonel Trilling, Kenneth Brooks, Alfred Canizon as board advisors, but his proposal really hit like roadblocks, right? Like the Ford Foundation turned down the proposal.
And there was some friction in like the MLA, the Modern Language Association.
And what was that about?
I mean, the MLA were working on creating these very detailed scholarly editions of American authors, and Wilson hated that. He wrote a whole book chapter called The Fruits of the MLA in 1968. He attacked the academic approach to editing and drew significant attention to the need for like quality editions.
Sounds like he had a very strong opinion on how books should be edited.
Oh, he wanted a clean text, not bogged down with tons of scholarly notes.
Oh, so did that at least help him get the proposal?
Funnily enough, yeah, George Bundy at Ford apparently took another look at Wilson's work, and after that public criticism and after years of involving Ford, the NEH, lots of literary figures, the Library of America finally launched. Founded in 1979, his first books were out in 1980.
Oh, then like what are some of his most influential works then?
Then I have to see some of his earlier works. The first one is Axel's Castle, published in 1931. It's purely a critical essay, and it really helped introduce European modernism to the average American reader. So it's got trends in contemporary literature from elements of symbolism. Actually, the entire book is about symbolism, and criticizing many authors like Arthur Rimbaud, Auguste Villiers, Adam, excuse me for my butchering, among others.
Yeah, it sounds like a mouthful. You know, he really didn't shy away from critiquing everyone he got the chance to. That was technically his whole philosophy, after all. He felt like it didn't matter who the person was, but they deserved criticisms regardless.
Some might find it arrogant. I maybe find it a bit arrogant, but others find it...
I mean, his other works, Patriotic Gore, which was released in 1962, was yet another literary criticism. This time of a civil war and, well, war in general. I mean, looking at the title itself, Patriotic Gore comes from the Maryland states at the time, a pro-Confederate song.
I mean, there's a lot of critique on that book, though. Like, a lot of critics noticed how it completely ignored black literature and slave narratives entirely, save for like one, which was Charlotte Forten. But it reflects his own white ignorance in the 1950s through the 1960s.
Exactly. Plus, didn't he win an award for like most of his works anyway?
Yeah, that Patriotic Gore actually won an award, the Presidential Medal of Freedom by JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy himself, in 1963.
I know, that sounds like he got a lot of recognitions that he wanted then.
Well, when JFK actually asked him about the book, he just told him to read it himself. He really didn't hesitate to be straightforward, even to the president.
So like Wilson's vision, at least making these classics accessible, finally happened. You know, that's quite a legacy. You know?
I mean, yeah, despite everything, he really did achieve what he wanted. He believed American literature deserved that kind of serious, lasting treatment. It wasn't a common view back then, because back then they were focused on French or British literature, but here he is bringing in American literature as it is by American authors. So he really helped shape the American canon as we know it in a very
Okay, but beyond that, how was he seen as a critic or a writer? You know, his role as a literary critic.
I mean, he's frequently called the foremost American man of letters, or one of the greatest men of letters America has ever produced. I mean, from the mid-1920s to the early 1960s, he was considered the premier literary critic in America, defining the life of arts and letters in the United States.
Oh, you know, like I also read that he also had an impact on more of a global scale too. You know, his book, like you mentioned earlier, Axel's Castle, introduced European symbolism and modernism to American readers. He gave an international perspective to American literature, and he also influenced like older, like I guess you would say, like the generations after him into forming judgments of European literature, and undertook a very important task, which was explaining the world to America and America to itself.
I mean, that's really interesting. Also, his criticisms weren't just limited to literary criticisms, but political and social ones too. Did you know he lived through World War I and World War II?
2 world wars? How would you...
Yeah, he wrote an article titled The Cold War and the Income Tax, a Protest in 1963. He protested Cold War policies. He even refused to pay income tax for 9 years because he believed the money funded military weapons, and he did not like that.
I mean, he served as a hospital orderly in World War I, didn't he? And being around everyday Americans, it probably grounded him and gave him a broader view.
I mean, yeah, and that's when later he was a literary editor at the New Republic, and he started blending literary critique with political commentary.
And the Great Depression probably radicalized him further.
Oh, absolutely. It politicized him deeply. He traveled, reported on strikes, protests, and the suffering that people were going through.
Would you say he was part of the lost generation?
In a way, yes. I mean, he came from an age of the World War I, just like Hemingway and Fitzgerald. He wrote for Vanity Fair, reviewed The Wasteland and Ulysses, and early on, he got their importance before many others did.
Oh yeah, Wilson was the first American to review Hemingway in 1924, right? Hemingway once said Wilson was the only American critic whose opinion he cared about.
I mean, that's big words. To wrap it up, Edmund Wilson was more than just a critic. He helped shape the American literary canon, challenged academia, and believed literature should speak to life and justice. The Library of America, that was his biggest. Thank you guys for watching our video. We hope you enjoyed or at least learned a little bit through our conversation on Edmund Wilson.
Yeah.
I mean, at first I didn't really like him. I still don't like him, but I think he did a lot of really important work. And regardless, you should be educated. We should learn about it. Yeah.
True.
So, thank you for watching.
Bye-bye.
Check out our next video.